Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jessie Haas. I'm the Senior National Director of the Therapy Animal Program here at Pet Partners. And this is a presentation that we call Volunteering with Your Pet. It is mostly designed for individuals who are considering becoming a volunteer with Pet Partners. And how I typically go over the information today is I start by telling you a little bit about what it's like to be a therapy animal team. What does it look like to go out into the community with your pet so you can get a real sense of what this volunteer journey is like. And then from there, with that foundation set, I plan to share with you all requirements and the process for actually becoming a volunteer with Pet Partners. So again, I'm Jessie Haas, the Senior National Director of the Therapy Animal Program at Pet Partners, and we'll get started here with Volunteer with Your Pet in just a moment. I would ask that you please, as I'm getting started here, drop in the comments your type of pet. So do you have a dog, cat, rabbit, horse, whatever it might be? And also where you're from. That's super helpful for me to know as I share information about the Therapy Animal Program at Pet Partners. So go ahead and drop those in the comments. I also want everybody to know that I'll talk for about 20 minutes here, but you can ask questions throughout the time that I'm talking. And then of course, at the end, there'll be plenty of time for questions. I'll hang around as long as folks want to hang around and talk about volunteering with your pet. So with that said, let's get to the first slide here. So these are the places where our therapy animal teams visit. I do want to say right off the bat, when I say teams, I'm talking about handler plus animal. So you plus your pet make a team. And teams visit in many different types of facilities. I just have listed up there some of the most common. But we have about 9,000 volunteers here in the United States, and they visit at about a couple thousand facilities at any given time. So some of our volunteers can get pretty creative with how they share their pet with the community, how they choose to spread the healing power of the human-animal bond. But a lot of them will have some experience in at least some facilities on this list. I see that people are popping in with comments, so I just want to take a pause here. Mike with a Sheltie, welcome. Thanks for coming. Laura with your mini Labradoodle in Oregon. Appreciate you being here. Gwen with her dog Paco in Washington. Great. Jessica from Florida with Obi-Wan. That's a great name for a pug, especially. And Jane from Seattle. Thank you for being here. Nice to meet you all. So let's go to the next slide. Now that you know where therapy animals visit, where you might go with your pet, let's talk about what a therapy animal visit looks like. A lot of our visits are social visits. They are social in nature. The intention is to reduce loneliness, reduce isolation, cheer somebody up, brighten their day, create an opportunity to converse with you as a handler while also interacting with your pet. Social sounds like it's casual, and it can be, but also there can be a lot of outcomes from social visits. It can really make somebody's day or week much better. And in that regard, kind of improve their emotional and mental health. So lots of social visits happening. Some of our teams do more structured visits with physical or occupational therapists, as an example. So say there's a physical therapist who works in a rehabilitation center, and they are working with a patient who might need some work on their fine motor skills. They might invite a volunteer team to join that session, and the client can practice those fine motor skills by petting a cat or by brushing a cat. So it provides motivation towards the goals of that session, and also just provides a real avenue to practice what it is they want to practice or heal what it is that they want to heal. The third bullet you see there is reading programs. We have one called Read With Me here at Pet Partners. So once you are a registered team, you can choose to opt in to our Read With Me program. Most of the time when visiting with Read With Me, you are interacting with children, typically at libraries or schools, although there are exceptions to that. And you are creating an opportunity for somebody to read to your pet most often. And again, similarly to therapy sessions, it can provide motivation. Some reading learners aren't motivated to spend a lot of time with books. Well, now suddenly a bunny rabbit comes in and it's very exciting and you want your turn to read. Also, animals are incredibly non-judgmental. So somebody who might be struggling with learning reading can feel like, I can just do the best that I can do in front of this rabbit. And it can be really inspiring for them that way. Really common type of visit for many of our teams to do if the animal particularly likes interacting with young people. The last one up here kind of relates a little bit to social visits, but has a more specific intention to relieve stress. So these types of visits take place at airports, commonly to relieve traveler stress before people get on planes, those who have anxiety about travel and things of that nature. And a lot of these can also take place at universities or colleges, perhaps the first week of school when freshmen are moving in, they're leaving their families for the first time. That can be very stressful. During finals week, also a lot of stress. So these can often be meeting with a lot of people for just short bursts to give people a 5 or 10 minute from the stress they are maybe acutely at that point in time experiencing. So just as said with the last slide, this isn't comprehensive of all of the types of visits, just as the last slide wasn't comprehensive of all of the types of facilities where our volunteers go, but this is a good representation of what most volunteers do with pet partners. So we can go to the next slide. By the way, I think we do have a few people listening who are current volunteers. So feel free, if you are a current volunteer and you have experience at some of the facilities I mentioned, or with the types of visits I just mentioned, please feel free to share your vignettes, your stories, or just let us know you and your pet's favorite place to visit and how you spend your time there. That's always really good to hear, or for prospective volunteers to hear directly from you all. Just want to take a brief moment to point out that even though it looks like those who have commented all have canines, Pet Partners actually registers 8 other species in addition to canines. Dogs are the most common. They make up about 93 or 94% of the animals involved in our program. But cats, horses, and rabbits are kind of next in line. And some of those groups of animals are increasing in popularity, rabbits specifically, along with guinea pigs. As you can imagine, there are some situations where the population receiving the visit may not prefer dogs. They might be fearful of dogs, or maybe the space is just more conducive to a smaller animal. So we welcome all of these species because they can all equally impact the lives of people in your community. We can go to the next slide. I see we have another joiner. Hi, Lori. I see you're interested. We're going through what it's like to be a Pet Partners volunteer, and then we're going to talk about requirements and processes. So hopefully you can follow up on your interest and join us as a volunteer. So I talked about facilities. I talked about what visits look like. Now I want to talk about what is the commitment when you're a Pet Partners volunteer. What does it look like day to day for you? How much time does it take? And ultimately, you arrange visits directly with facilities yourself based on your schedule and availability. So we have a lot of volunteers that might only visit a facility once a month, or maybe even just a few times a quarter. We have other volunteers who visit places twice a week. We have some volunteers who dedicate to one facility, and that is the only place they volunteer on their schedule. We have others who volunteer at, maybe 2 different facilities, plus maybe they do special events at another one from time to time. So it's really up to you. On our website, once you are a registered volunteer and when you are logged in and your registration is complete, you do have the opportunity to search for facilities on our website that are looking for therapy animal teams. So that's one option. That includes what they're looking for, how to contact them, and you can get directly in touch. Other volunteers choose to approach facilities in their community. So perhaps they have a parent who is living in a care center, a nursing care center, and they want to bring their animal into that facility. They can certainly approach the facility, talk about therapy animal volunteerism. Maybe your child is in school. You want to do it similarly there. That is absolutely okay. You can make the outreach yourself. A lot of the facilities that I mentioned earlier, schools, universities, hospitals, rehab centers, they're really accustomed to what a therapy animal is, even if they haven't had one yet. Most of them are aware of what it is and would be likely to at least listen to your request to come visit their facility. Another way that people find visits is throughout the US and actually in a few global locations, we have what's called community partners or community partner groups. And these are groups of pet partner volunteers that live geographically close to one another. They have regular meetings. It's just nice to be alongside people who volunteer in a similar way that you do. And sometimes those community partners get direct requests from facilities for volunteer therapy animal teams. And then the community partner in turn will push that out to the teams that are a member of the community partner. So that's another way to find visits. But ultimately, it's really up to you where you visit, how often. The one thing I will share here, though, is that you cannot visit with your pet in any facility for more than 2 hours a day or 2 hours cumulatively. And the reason for that is because even the most energetic animal who absolutely loves going out on visits, and our animals really do, by the end of 2 hours, they will be fatigued. And we have to remember that therapy animals are not working animals. We want to make sure they're constantly enjoying what they're doing and that we give them adequate breaks and rest. So the only kind of limit on your time is you cannot visit for more than 2 hours a day. You do want to keep in mind that animals do need to be groomed and kept very clean before they go to a visit. And often after a visit, as I mentioned, they're very tired. So you want to make sure you leave time in your schedule to get them home and settled in, and you don't have other plans during that day, most likely. So you just have to factor that into how often you commit to visits. We'll go to the next slide. Please, again, everybody, if you have questions about what I'm sharing or what I'm saying, type in questions. I'd be happy to answer them as I go along. So I hope I've given you a good sense of what therapy animal volunteerism looks like. If it sounds interesting to you, let's move to considering if your animal is eligible, and then after that, what the process is like. So some of the questions listed up on the screen are things that you might be wondering. And these are absolutely important for eligibility considerations. So all animals need to be a year old, with the exception of our pocket pets. That's rats, rabbits, and guinea pigs. They just need to be 6 months old. All other animals need to be a year. One caveat on that is you can begin the process before your animal is a year old. If you want to take the required coursework, which we'll talk about in just a moment, when your animal is 9 months old, that's totally okay. It's just that you cannot complete the required evaluation until your animal hits that 1 year or 6 months if they are a pocket pet. Also, animals need to have lived in their owner's home for a minimum amount of time. For birds, it's 1 year. For all their species, it's at least 6 months. That is because we want to ensure that you have built a bond with your animal, that you have spent time learning more about them, about their temperament, what their preferences are, because that bond and that teamwork is so important when you're out in the community visiting with your pet. All animals must be reliably house trained. Waste collection devices are not allowed, with the exception of flight suits for birds. Animals do need to be on leash, and sometimes people don't assume that about, say, a rabbit or a cat, but they have to be leashed even if you plan to carry them most of the time. Of course, harness might substitute in for certain very large dogs or for llamas, alpacas, horses, but the point is that we don't allow animals during therapy animal visits to free roam regardless of the species. Animals cannot be fed a raw diet, so keep that in mind. Animals cannot have a history of aggression. And then this next one is related to just general health and well-being. So we have a lot of animals in our program that have a chronic health issue. We have a lot of animals in our program that have a disability. That doesn't automatically disqualify your pet from participating. What we do ask you to ask yourself is, does this disability or does this illness or ailment make my animal uncomfortable on a regular basis? would it be asking too much of my animal to put them in these situations? Again, therapy animals are not working animals. We want to make sure that visiting is comfortable for them. Now, there are some medications or certain diseases that do disqualify an animal because perhaps the medication present some infection prevention and control issues. So if your animal is on a medication that you are not sure about, before you get too far in the process, please feel free to email us or to contact us. Let us know the medication your animal is on, and we'll let you know if it is a disqualifying medication before you go too much further. But for all animals, regardless of whether they have an ailment or a disability, all animals will need to submit, or I should say, handlers will have to submit on behalf of their animals, a form from your veterinarian letting us know the health of the pet in general. And then all animals must have basic obedience skills that are specific to their species. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those in a moment. I'm going to look over at the comments here. How much demand is there for therapy animal teams? Jane already hopped in and answered this. Generally, we have more demand than we have supply. I mentioned, if you were here for that part of the presentation online, we allow facilities to advertise their volunteer spots on our website, and many wait for weeks or months to get a team to come in and visit. And we did lose some volunteers during the pandemic. Life situation changed. Animals aged out of the program during lockdown. So right now, especially with the number of teams we have being a little bit deflated due to the pandemic, we have a lot of demand. Now, there could be certain geographic pockets where it could be a little bit more challenging than others, but generally speaking, it's not really that there aren't enough opportunities. Sometimes volunteers do have a hard time finding them, but we are there for you every step of the way. Even though you get to decide where you go, if you need help, we will help you. We can go to the next slide. I'm not seeing anything else come in right now. So I just talked about the requirements for animals, but just because they meet the requirements doesn't mean they're necessarily set up for success as a therapy animal. It is very important for therapy animals to be people-oriented, sociable, and friendly. And that includes to strangers and people they've never met before. I know in the past, I've had dogs who, if you came into our home and you were known to them, their temperament and their personality was just perfect. But if you brought in a stranger, they would be a little bit shy until they warmed up. But therapy animals need to be warmed up to a wide variety of people pretty quickly. Now, that's not to say animals never encounter somebody that they feel a little bit unsure of. That's okay if it's on occasion. But consistently, we're looking for an animal that is people-oriented to all people. Animals need to have good basic obedience skills that are specific to their species. Again, I think we have mostly dog owners listening, but if you have a cat or you have a rabbit and you're unsure what those obedience skills look like, our website does have the information. When you log in to the volunteer center on our website, you can search in our resource library for your species, rabbit, and it'll show you what it is that we evaluate for in terms of their obedience skills. We are looking for animals that remain calm. And that also means, as much as we appreciate the energy of an animal, and some of our young animals are energetic, they do need to be able to check some of that energy at the door because they may be interacting with people who are frail, people who are elderly, people who are very young. So we love to see the energy, but it also has to be a calm energy, if you will, to keep everybody safe. No jumping, no extreme exuberance when interacting with people. And then, of course, they need to be non-aggressive towards people. We covered that, but they also need to be non-aggressive towards other animals. And that's because if you are visiting, say, at an airport, you are going to encounter other animals, service animals, emotional support animals that are allowed to fly, pets, maybe dogs that work for TSA or work with TSA officials. Same in almost any other environment, there could be other animals present. So we need to ensure that all animals registered with pet partners can remain non-aggressive towards other animals. Let's go to the next slide. It's really easy in therapy animal volunteerism to focus on the animal, but the handler is equally as important. Of course, you also need to be friendly and professional and polite to a wide variety of people. But as importantly, whenever you're visiting, your number one priority is to your animal. It's not to the person you're visiting. Even though you want to help that person, you want to engage with that person, your animal is your number one priority at all times. So we are looking for handlers who know their pets well, know how to predict challenges they may have in any given environment, and proactively remove those challenges or navigate around those challenges or redirect their animal's behavior if necessary. Our handlers course does teach this. We're going to talk about the handlers course in a bit in terms of what that looks like, but I like to summarize it by saying you are your animal's best advocate. So as a handler, your responsibility is to your animal, and that's what makes a successful handler first and foremost. And of course, you need to follow policies and procedures that are outlined by pet partners for all visiting situations. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Now we're going to talk about how to become a therapy animal team. So if you like what you've heard so far, you feel like this would be a good fit for your pet, you're eligible. These are some of the steps. Now, how you manage your registration or how you go through the process is online. You create a volunteer center account if you don't already have one, and you start a registration. And when you start a registration, of course, you'll enter your basic information, your name, your pet's age, things like that. And then there are several other steps. These 4 are not the only steps, but some of the other ones are pretty small or administrative in nature. I just wanted to put these up on screen so you could see that you have to take a course, you have to visit a vet, and you have to pass a team evaluation. Those are kind of the 3 biggies, if you will. We're really going to focus on steps 2 and 4 as I kind of wrap up this presentation, as that's what most people usually have questions about. So let's go to the next slide. We require every new handler to take handler training, and it can be done online or in person. In person is not available everywhere, but of course, if you don't have an in-person option near you, you can select the online option, or maybe you're somebody who just prefers to take your training online, and that's okay. It really comes down to what will work best for you. Big advantages of doing the training in person via a workshop is the person teaching it is an experienced pet partners volunteer. You get the opportunity to engage with others who are going through the same process as you. You get some hands-on things that you don't really get online. But the advantage of online, beyond just the fact that anybody can take it no matter where they live, is they can also do it at their own pace. If you want to do a half an hour today, an hour tomorrow, you want to take a couple weeks to get through it, that's okay. So it can be on your own schedule, and you can also revisit things in the online course because it's there and available for you. The handler course does not involve the animal. So even if you take it in person, your pet does not go with. This is about training you as a handler, not only to understand pet partners' policies and procedures, but also to set you up for success in facilitating interactions between your pet and people you're visiting with. Because it isn't just about, at least not always, letting people pet your cat or your horse. It is about facilitating interactions. Generally, the question I get right away when I say, our handlers course is only for handlers, people say, well, what training is required for the pet? And there is no requirement. You have to keep in mind that we register very diverse species. For anybody who doesn't have a dog, it's very difficult to take formal classes with other people who have your species led by a trainer. So we want to make sure we're inclusive of them and not create requirements they can't complete. We also believe that our animals, canines included, are coming to this at different points in their life. We might have a 6-year-old dog join with their handler who has already done a bunch of basic obedience skills. And just through the kind of natural course of the animal's life, they picked up a lot of skills. They become very reliable, very predictable in their behavior. We don't want to require that handler to take that pet to some sort of specific training if it's not necessary. So the handler's course will teach you, as do our other documents, what your pet needs to be able to do. And if you need additional training for your pet, and if you want to seek out a professional or go to a class, you're absolutely able to do that. If you're somebody who would prefer to work on training at home, you can do that. If you feel your animal already is trained really well, maybe you just need to brush up. So no required pet training or animal training. You do have a required course for handlers. Let's go to the next slide. Once your handler's course is complete and your animal is a year old and has met the other requirements I told you about, they can take the evaluation. This is where you and your pet go in front of a licensed Pet Partners evaluator who essentially assesses whether or not you are prepared to undertake therapy animal volunteerism and visits. There is about 20 exercises. It varies depending on if your dog is really large or really small, or if you have a cat versus a dog, but 20-ish or so exercises. And the first half of the evaluation is obedience skills. So if you have a dog, sit down, stay, come when called, things of that nature. The second half of the evaluation is really trying to simulate an environment of a therapy animal visit. So the evaluator will introduce situations to you that you might encounter when you're in a hospital or a school. You'll hear a loud noise like a bell ringing or an emergency vehicle coming through. You will encounter somebody using a piece of medical equipment like a walker or a wheelchair to ascertain how you and your pet navigate interactions in that situation. So the second half doesn't look the same as what you might have seen in other types of work with your animal or classes with your animal. It is really specific to therapy animal volunteerism. Really important to point out, the evaluation scores both you and your pet. You are half the score, your pet is half the score. Your pet could ace the whole thing, and if you don't, then you may not pass the evaluation that day. We assess our handlers on some of the things I already talked about. Do you advocate for your animal? Are you proactive in communicating to people in the room what your pet does and doesn't like? Do you reassure your animal? Are you always positive with your animal? Those are things you are scored on, because Pet Partners really believes that the success and safety of any therapy animal team is a joint effort, and our evaluation reflects that. Please go ahead to the next slide. And I know there's comments coming in, but I'm almost done here. So I'm going to loop back to those questions at the end. Up on your screen is the benefits of registering with Pet Partners. The one I really want to point out is liability insurance. So nearly any facility in this country, hospital, school, university, airport, whatever it might be, they are going to require that you have liability insurance for your activities with your pet in their facility. We provide that insurance for you. So that is a huge benefit and something you absolutely need to get into the majority of these facilities. I think the next slide has my contact information. Oh, sorry, we have one more thing. I just thought I'd mention this because most people, even if you're not yet a volunteer, but you're considering becoming one, or even if you don't become a volunteer, people really tend to love the slogans on these shirts that we have at Pet Partners. These are shirts that we release in advance of National Therapy Animal Day to celebrate that. And so I just wanted to let folks know that those are available for purchase right now through April 10th. So you can take a peek and look at what's available for this cycle of National Therapy Animal Day celebrations. I think the next slide then. Yep, there we go. There's my contact information for anybody who has additional questions. I'm going to get to the comments and I'll answer those. But if you have specific questions that are specific to you or your pet, you want to ask me, please feel free to email me. Give me a day or two to respond, because sometimes I get a lot of questions after these, but I'm happy to help. Okay, with that said, before we hop off, let me look at what has come in. So Marianne, you're saying you want to take the instructor course. So this is a good opportunity to let folks know that once you are a handler, after you've been with us for a set period of time, you can become an instructor or evaluator yourself. Our instructors are the individuals who teach our therapy animal handler in-person course option. So Marianne, I hope that you talk to my colleagues. There is an application for that for becoming an instructor. If you haven't heard from anybody or you're not sure how to apply to become an instructor, please email me what's on the screen and I'll get you connected with the folks who license our volunteer leaders like instructors. Let's see. In case we didn't see it, my colleague, Bree, who's behind the scenes here, she dropped in a link for those of you who don't yet have a volunteer center account. I encourage you to do that. As I said, that is where you manage your registration and all of the steps, but it is also a wonderful place. If you look at that resource library, there's all sorts of good stuff in there for prospective volunteers that will help you understand more about what is the course, what is the evaluation, what does it look like for my pet or my species. So you can do some like Googling around or searching around in that resource library to answer a lot of questions and learn more about Pet Partners. So create an account if you haven't already. Judith, I'm reading your question right now. I'm not 100% sure I understand your question. So you're talking about a graded approach to this requirement. I assume you mean a graded approach to the evaluation. I'm not 100% sure what you mean there. We are consistently looking at our evaluation processes, what works best for new teams, what works best for renewing teams. We have considered all their alternatives. One thing to keep in mind is that when we shift how we evaluate people, and our evaluation has been reviewed by experts, we do feel very strongly that what is in there is what's important for safety and effectiveness of therapy animal volunteerism. If we change anything about the evaluation, all 500 evaluators need to be potentially retrained. And our evaluators, and this is a good reminder for everybody, our evaluators are volunteers too. So the vast majority of them are visiting, they're out with their pet in their communities, and then they turn around and spend multiple Saturdays a year evaluating other teams to get them through the process. So it's a big lift to be an evaluator. So we try to be mindful of not changing our evaluation processes really frequently because it requires retraining and a whole new system set up for how evaluators manage their time. So I'm not quite sure if I'm understanding your question. Yeah, I don't have time to look up graded approach right now. And I think that can mean a number of different things. So I'm happy to talk with you offline about that. No problem. I know it's hard when there aren't evaluators in the area. So that makes it more difficult for people to find evaluations that can happen. Okay, so Laura, this is a good question. Do you have suggestions to get realistic experience in different settings prior to being certified? For example, with hospital equipment. I see. So if I'm understanding this correctly, you want to make sure, and this is really smart, to think about having your animal be exposed to things that they might see in a therapy animal setting. So a recommendation a lot of people have is to spend time in dog-friendly places. So Home Depots, hardware stores, things of that nature, where even if somebody isn't using a piece of hospital equipment, it's a good opportunity to introduce your animal to equipment that wheels, to loud noises, to people going up and down, right? If you think about some of the equipment the employees use there. So you hear that one a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of dog-friendly patios now, breweries. If you spend enough time in these places, you are going to see a variety of people. The other thing is to have somebody you know in your life simulate the use of some medical equipment. So maybe you don't have a wheelchair on hand, but maybe there's a cane or something that can simulate a cane. So you can expose animals even at home with some of those things. I've even heard from people that going to a park at different times of the day, if you know children are going to be present or there's a soccer game going on, something like that, and you walk your pet around, something like that, they're going to hear noises, they're going to hear screaming, they're going to see a lot of activity. These are not only important to expose your animal to some of the things they might see in a therapy animal visit, but it's also a great opportunity for you to fine-tune obedience skills when distracted. Because a lot of pets, as many of you know, particularly dogs, can follow obedience commands no problem in a training room or at home, but suddenly there's a ball being kicked around by kids and it's a lot harder, or they need a little bit more practice following cues in those situations. So it can be kind of both and, where you're doing some exposure, but you're also practicing your teamwork when you're distracted. I hope I answered your question, Laura. And I see nothing else coming in, and we've gone a whole 35 minutes. Oh, one more did. No, I think that is it. Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I hope this was helpful. Again, I strongly encourage you, get a volunteer center account, email me if you have questions. And if you want any fun shirts, those are available through April 10th. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Wednesday afternoon and evening. Take care.